Hey guys, Mrs. Fox here with part 1 of the 7.2 slide deck, The Enlightenment, from Discovery Chapter 11.3. Get your notes ready to go, get that paper out, get your highlighters and writing utensils on so we can get some learning going on. All right, don't forget to write down your title and your EQs. Throughout the PowerPoint, I may or may not address the fact you need left-hand side questions. Don't forget you need them. They should not be something that can be answered with just a yes or a no. They should not be something that could be answered with just a word or two. Your left-hand side questions should be deep enough that it takes a sentence or two or more to answer those efficiently and correctly. So keep that in mind as we go through. If you need more time to get down your title and EQ information, then push pause. Otherwise, here we go. All right, Q1, what is the Enlightenment? All right, well, you might remember that we just very recently did this scientific revolution, right? And the scientific revolution took place in the 15 and into the 1600s, and it was a change in the way people looked at life. People wanted proof, people wanted evidence, people wanted to be rational and use reason as a way to think through problems in life. And that, if you remember from us talking during the scientific revolution, was not going to be a big jump in looking at science that way and the way the world works that way to how people behave and how government should work, and politics. Well, if we're looking at scientific stuff, why not politics too? And so as you go through the scientific revolution, you get into the Enlightenment that kind of springs up in the 1600s in Western Europe. Remember, we're focusing on Western Europe right now. So why is it called the Enlightenment? Well, a group of educated individuals throughout Europe were the ones that wanted to examine human life. They thought it to be a good idea to rationally think through the reasons humans were around, what made up a fulfilled and prosperous life, how humans should treat each other and how they should behave. Okay, so a group of educated people wanted to rationally kind of think through that and have discussions and debates about behavior and morals and right from wrong and government and laws and all that kind of stuff. And so they called this period the Enlightenment because they took it upon themselves, these educated people throughout Europe, to enlighten, right, or shine a light on a new way of thinking to the masses. Because while education was spreading and while more people were getting educated and knew how to read and write, it didn't mean that everybody would be necessarily considered a scholar or a very well-educated person. That's still a small percentage of the population, okay? So these well-educated people take it upon themselves to enlighten the rest of the common man with, what they have found or been debating about the purpose of life and morals and right and wrong and government and all that stuff. All right, if you need more time, push pause. Otherwise, get yourself that left-hand side question going on and draw a line underneath everything you just wrote all the way across your page. All right, you would do yourself a favor to maybe jot down at least the words in red. I know on FYI slides, you typically don't have to write stuff down, but you want to know where the heck the Enlightenment came from. It didn't just drop out of the sky one day and somebody looked at somebody else and said, we should think rationally. Like, it doesn't happen that way. Okay, so there was these things that built up to getting to this Enlightenment movement. One of them was the scientific revolution, which I kind of touched on already. That observation and experimentation and reasoning really encouraged the brain to start thinking about everything in that dimension, like wanting reason and explanation for everything. Okay, the Renaissance, that whole questioning spirit that education is spreading and people have potential with humanism spreading and stuff, right? So how do we fulfill our potential, right? And that investigative spirit people have of actually valuing education, wanting to know more, and being interested in these kind of conversations. The Reformation, that the Catholic Church had slowly been losing, its power. Does it still have power? Yes. Are people still Catholic in the 1600s? Absolutely. Okay. But the height of its power has come and gone by this point. It has slowly been losing its power as time has gone on, as other Protestant churches open and as some people abandon religion altogether. Okay. So the Reformation was another thing where people protested. They pushed against the social norms that had been built up in society for hundreds of years, and now all of a sudden people are shaking things up with scientific thinking and the Reformation way of thinking. And so the Enlightenment kind of gets rooted in that idea of, well, let's go back to the drawing board and re-examine this stuff. Do we still agree with the moral values we've been following for a long time or not? Do we agree with government that we've been following for a long time or not? Those type of questions. Of course, classical culture, Greeks and Romans were famous for having huge philosophical discussions with hundreds of people sometimes in attendance just debating things, right? So with the Renaissance still going on during the beginning of the Enlightenment, we're getting towards the end of the Renaissance, but they do overlap a bit. That whole classical culture coming back to life and people looking back to Greek and Roman times for inspiration was another root of the Enlightenment. And then, of course, just Christian ideas by the Protestants that you have a brain, you're smart, figure it out, right? So all these things kind of accumulate to make the setting ripe, make it the right time for people to kind of question the world around them. And that's where the Enlightenment's going to come from. All right, so Q2, change in beliefs, write it down, highlight it yellow. All right, so this is going to change the way people think about life and live their life in the world. Initially with just educated groups of people, but over time these values getting spread in the Enlightenment will trickle down to the common man that's maybe not as well educated and will eventually become the new norm. So the Enlightenment's a game changer. It changes the way people think about government and think about right from wrong and think about the power people have and what they should be allowed to do and should not be allowed to do, okay? And so it's going to change the way people think about the world, all right? Reason is big here, just like with the scientific revolution. I want a reason for everything you're telling me to believe. You should logically be able to explain something to me, or I shouldn't have to follow it, obey it, believe it. You need proof. You need evidence, okay? So in the Enlightenment, reason's going to be big. Question everything, okay? Want a reasonable explanation before you believe it or choose to not believe something. Okay, this will end up pushing into later societies and how they think about the rights of people and the role of government versus freedoms that people should have and what the government should be allowed and not allowed to tell them to do, okay? Is it right that a law should be you shouldn't murder people? Or should you have the right as a person to murder people, for example? Should a monarchy continue to be the best form of government? Or is there more enlightened forms of government? All these, question after question about, let's reason this out. All right, so beliefs will change about human life, human behavior, their rights, their morals. The government's role in people's lives are going to be changing because of the Enlightenment. All right, draw a line underneath everything you just wrote all the way across your page. If you need a left-hand side question, push pause, get that down, because here we go. All right, so here's a little graphic for you guys. The Enlightenment, very long time ago, the light bulb became a, hey, I have an idea, right? So the Enlightenment is like, hey, we've been enlightened with obvious knowledge. We should start practicing immediately. And one of them is, hey, people have opinions. People are smart. People can figure things out for themselves, right? All of these things we've been talking about for a few units now. We should have freedom of speech. That should be a thing because we should have the right to, voice our opinion or our concerns or our praise and applause at, things that are going right or wrong within our country, within different movements, within different forms of government, within certain things going on in society. So freedom of speech is going to be a big push in the Enlightenment. Because remember, guys, you have grown up in a country since before you were born that has allowed freedom of speech. Okay. A lot of people at this time in the 1600s did not have that luxury. If you came out speaking out against the Catholic Church, or you came out speaking out against government or the monarch in charge, or a strong, wealthy household or faction that was controlling the politics, you could very likely find yourself in a jail cell, or dead, or missing forever, or beaten up. Okay, so freedom of speech has not been around forever. It is a right we should have, but not everybody always had it. Another idea that comes out of the Enlightenment is the right to life, liberty, and property. The right to live. No one should incarcerate you, should put you in jail without just cause, right? You should not be thrown into jail because you have an orange shirt on today and I'm the king and I don't like orange, so I'm putting you away for a year. That makes no sense, right? You have the right to your life. You should have freedom in that life as long as you have not hurt someone else or yourself. Liberty is a fancy word for freedom. Trust me when I tell you guys, the whole first semester of 8th grade, you need to know the word liberty means freedom, and into high school and into college and for life. That's a word you want to burn into the brain up here. Liberty is a fancy word for freedom. You should have, again, the right to be free, to travel, to pick up hobbies that you enjoy, to pick a profession you think you'd be good at, as long as you have not, hurt your peers in any way or a danger to society. You should have that right. And property, of course, again, something you guys in this culture take for granted. A lot of you have homes your parents own or are working towards owning. Some of you guys rent, okay? But you have the option to make that a reality in the United States. Many places in the world, even now, today, in present time, owning property is a pipe dream, something that is not possible for most people in many places, and especially back then in the 1600s, unless the king gifted you some, or you came from an extremely rich family somewhere in Western Europe, you were not going to own property. So these are basic rights coming out of the Enlightenment that you guys think, well, yeah, we should have right to life, and yeah, we should have right to freedom, and yeah, we should have right to property. These seem super obvious to you because you've grown up knowing them. You got to remember they had to come from somewhere first. So the Enlightenment period is where you're gaining these rights that become like commonplace in at least the American way of thinking. Again, not everywhere all over the world even now has these ways of thinking, but a lot of Western Europe and America does. Okay, how about a social contract? A social contract, guys, is that, hey, we should have government because no government can often lead to anarchy and chaos, right? Governments, if ran well, can be a good thing. They do things like, provide protection for the people and give us roads and trash collection and clean water and, all those kind of things. But at the same time, how much control should the government really have? How many rights should they be able to take away from a person? So it's this social contract. It's not literally a contract you sign one day once you turn 18. It's just kind of, known that, hey, a person living in whatever country you're in that has a government, I'm willing to give up some of my freedoms in exchange for government, protection and goods and services, because it's a relationship. I'll pay my taxes and I'll follow certain laws, okay, if the government provides certain things for me and gives me protection, and it's, a relationship. It's an agreement between the two places. However, hey, if you void that social contract because as a person you break the law, or as a government you're doing things wrong and you're being, tyrannical, you're being tyranny, a dictatorship, okay, then maybe we could break that social contract. Lastly, how about separation of powers? Separation of powers. One person, a dictator, a monarch, having all of the say is maybe not such a good idea, says Enlightenment thinkers. Maybe we should spread power out and give several people power within different segments of the population so no one person gets too powerful and no one position becomes too powerful. And under a model where more people are involved, it would be a lot harder to have corruption and lying and selfishness going on in government. All right, I'll see you for part 2 when you're ready to view that. See you then.